Hello again, everyone. It's me once again coming to you from my fortress of solitude. Hope that everybody is well and healthy and safe and staying sane through this very, very crazy time. Um, all right, your Essay 2 revisions are due on Wednesday. There is a section in Blackboard where it says Essay 2 revisions here. So go ahead and hand them in under that section. Please make sure they are in docx format. Remember, .docx format. If you hand them in PDF format, I cannot make comments on them. And I'd like to leave you comments when I grade it. If there are any questions or problems, please email me and we'll set up a time to either Skype or talk on the phone. All right, so let's get right to the questions that you sent me. You guys sent me some awesome questions, and I'm going to use today's video and Wednesday's video to answer them. I want to answer all of them because they're all very good questions. Let's start with the first two are about introductions and conclusions. The first question is, my question is, how can I write my opening sentence introduction? What should I write for my first sentence? It's an excellent question. There is no single answer. There is no single way to write an introduction. The answer to this question, and as a matter of fact, the answer to everything that all the questions that I'm going to answer, have the same basic answer. And I'll bet you know what I'm going to say before I say it, is convey the thesis. Remember, you have one job, and that's to convey your thesis. So the answer to all of these things that you ask about, the first best answer is do it in a way that conveys your thesis the best. So, you have an infinite possible theses that you can convey. So there is no single solitary answer for how to write the opening sentence. Keep in mind that the introduction has several purposes. One is to capture the reader's imagination. Two is to convey the subject, the general subject of the essay. Three is to convey at least an idea of the thesis. Sometimes it conveys the entire thesis, but by the time the reader finishes reading the introduction, a good introduction to an essay, the reader has an idea of, at least an idea of the point that the author is trying to make. A good introduction conveys the language that the author will be using. And by that, I mean, the level of vocabulary, that the kind of language. Is it formal? Is it casual? Is it humorous? Is it academic? So it conveys that language, it conveys that tone, and it conveys a point of view that the author is taking. And a good introduction convinces the reader to keep reading. And when I give you your homework assignment for today, it's going to be to read a bunch of introductions to essays and see which ones convince you to keep reading further. So, as we've said before in class, when you're sitting down to write the draft of an essay, you can't possibly know what all of these things are. You have the subject you're writing about. You have an idea of the working thesis that you're starting with, but you don't know what the rest of the essay is going to be. Remember, we talked about in class that a good introduction, it's like when you go into the ice cream store and you see 36 flavors of ice cream and you don't know which one you want to try. You know what some of them are, you don't know what some of them are. So what do? You ask for a taste. And when you get that taste, you imagine what an entire cone or sundae or whatever with this ice cream is going to be like. That's what an introduction is. It's a taste, it's a sample of your essay that convinces the reader, go ahead, read this entire essay. When you sit down to draft an essay, you cannot possibly know what the rest of the essay is going to be. So when you draft the essay, write whatever it is that gets you writing the rest of it. Then write the rest of it, then revise it, then write your introduction last. If you're not sure of what to write for an introduction, just write anything that gets you writing, and then go back and craft an introduction that best reflects the language, the tone, the point of view, the thesis, the general subject. Then craft that essay last and write an introduction that will convince the reader to read the rest of your essay. We're going to start looking at introductions on Friday. I'm going to answer these questions today and Wednesday. You're going to do homework for Wednesday, and I will address that homework on Friday, and we'll begin to start talking about introductions and how to write them best. The second question that someone wrote to me was about conclusions. How do I write a conclusion without sounding repetitive? I feel like by the time I get to my conclusion, I've said everything that needs to be said. Also, how do I start the conclusion without something cheesy like in conclusion? Okay, that's an excellent question as well. A good conclusion has a purpose, just like a good introduction. A good conclusion both sums up the essay and leaves the reader with a closing thought so that he or she, the reader, continues to think about the essay. They continue the conversation with the author even after they've put the essay down and they walk away. They're still thinking about it. So what I would advise for this person who asked this question, and for all of you, is that in a draft, if it helps you to write the cheesy words in conclusion, write them. Write, when you get to the conclusion, write in conclusion, and then write what it is you mean in your conclusion. And then in revision, take out in conclusion and craft the conclusion of the essay. I'm sure many of you have been told in the past, repeat the thesis and sum up what you've said. You can do that. That's not a bad way to write a conclusion. You know, in conclusion, in summary, what you're trying to do with your essay is convey your thesis to the reader. So when you get to the conclusion, you can restate your points. You can sum up what you've said. You can sum up what you've said and tell the reader what it means. We're going to be looking at some essays, and we'll look at their conclusions as well. I would also advise you go back and look at the essays that we've read so far for class. You're familiar with them at this point because we've talked about them at length. Go back, look at the conclusions, see how those authors summed up their essays, okay? So again, if you need to write the cheesy words in conclusion to let you conclude what you're writing, write it. Write in conclusion. And then in the revision, take it out, okay? So a lot of people also had questions about paragraphs because we've been talking about paragraphs for the last week or two. One student asked me, what can I do to make a clear, concise point in a paragraph? How can I prevent from wandering away from the point and having my paragraphs become a bag of random points that don't really make sense? That's a great question because a lot of us wrestle with that as student writers. The best way to do it is, again, to start with a great specific thesis. If your thesis is general and broad, it's going to leave you a lot of room to wander around in and collect random thoughts to put into that bag of thoughts, right? If you start with a specific, concise, interesting thesis, it will tell you what specific points to make. For example, if you had a thesis that said, I don't think American institutions keep us safe and they shouldn't be trusted because while they keep society going on a day-to-day basis, they fail us in times of crisis and tend not to change going forward. Let me read that again, since I don't have a blackboard to put it up on. If your thesis is, I don't think American institutions keep us safe and they shouldn't be trusted because while they keep society going on a day-to-day basis, they fail us in times of crisis and tend not to change going forward. Now that's a very specific thesis. It answers the assignment that I gave you directly, and it tells you what to write. It tells you what specific points to make while you're writing it. I don't think American institutions keep us safe and they shouldn't be trusted because while they keep society going on a day-to-day basis, right there, what institutions keep American society going on a day-to-day basis? What institutions keep your life going on a day-to-day basis? That's 3 or 4 paragraphs right there. American society is kept running by, in general, what institutions? And then 2 or 3 paragraphs on the institutions that keep your life going, specifically on a day-to-day basis. And how do they do that? So when you mention each institution, you can mention how they keep society going. What institutions do keep American society going on a day-to-day basis? Government, federal, state, local government, banks, commerce, schools, right? And so we're looking at just America on a day-to-day basis. How does America run? Okay. And then the institutions that keep your life specifically going, certainly Southern, right? How do you go to Southern? Well, you get a loan. The banks, they're an institution that keep us going on a day-to-day basis. Then they fail us in times of crisis. Examples. Give us examples. Certainly, several of you are writing about the coronavirus, and that's fine. It is at the forefront of everyone's mind right now. Absolutely understandable. So according to this thesis, our institutions are failing to keep us safe from this. Which institutions and how? Those are clear, concise points that you can make in paragraphs. Okay, which institutions are failing us? And they tend not to change going forward. Examples. There was more than one of you that wrote about the Sandy Hook shooting. The Sandy Hook shooting occurred. It was not the last school shooting that happened. The institutions are failing. You could make the argument, if you were supporting this thesis, that institutions are not keeping students safe. How? Why? Prove that. Okay. That thesis directs you to make a series of concise statements to support it. The more concise and specific your thesis is, the less room you will have to wander around and collect a bag full of random points that don't make sense. All right? If you start with a thesis that's vague or weak or too simple, then it's difficult to make clear and concise points about it. Do you follow me? We've said this several times in class, and I'll say it again. It feels counterintuitive. It feels like if you want to make if you want to write an essay that will appeal to a broad audience, it feels like you should make a broad general thesis. Exactly the opposite is true. When you make a single, very specific, concise, interesting, and fairly complex thesis, it gives you a lot to write about, number one. And number two, that's what makes it interesting, because you are making a specific point. Okay? Somebody asked me, some of the ideas that I have are developed in a few sentences. Are 3 or 4 sentences considered a paragraph? Excellent question. The answer is yes. Some paragraphs are 3 to 4 sentences. Some are more, some are less. I've seen very, very effective paragraphs that consist of one word. All right. You will see paragraphs of all different lengths in good essays. Your paragraphs should be whatever length you need to convey one single idea. All right. Whatever you need to make your point and make it completely, that's the length that you need for your paragraph. Other people, well, we'll get into this in the next question, but you want to make your point, you want to develop it completely so that you have conveyed it effectively to your audience, and then move on to your next point. Sometimes you can convey a point, like I said, with one word, right? Sometimes you've all had conversations, I'm sure, in which somebody has gone on some long, elaborate explanation for something, and you've replied, nonsense. That's a good paragraph right there. Nonsense. Or, you know, if we were using more colorful language in the essay, because I've seen essayists do this, they might write, you know, BS. Bull crap. That's a good, that says it. That says exactly what you think of the previous point. You see what I mean? So there is no set length for what a paragraph should be. It should be the length that you need to make your point. No shorter, no longer. All right? It's tough. You have to, as you practice writing, you'll develop a feel for it. The more you write, the more you develop a feel for it. It's really about gauging your audience's reaction. How much do they need to get your point? And that has to do with our next question. But before I get to the next question, here is your attendance question. The question I have for you that I would like you to email me. Here's your question. Who was the 9th president of the United States of America? President number 9, the 9th president. And for extra credit, how long did he serve? So who was the 9th president of the United States? How long did he serve? Email it to me at that address, which you all should know by now. Ruscoe, ENG112@gmail.com. Who was the 9th president of the United States? And for extra credit, how long did he serve? Okay, let's get to the last question I'm going to take up today. We'll do if I didn't get to your question today, I'll get to it on Wednesday. Someone asked, speaking of lengths of paragraphs, how can I add more detail to certain parts of my essay without going off on a tangent? It's a very good question because a lot of students have that problem. The answer is, I think the best answer is, don't be afraid of going off on tangents in your draft. If you go off on a tangent in a draft, that's fine. Sometimes you never know what you might find in a tangent. You may discover useful information as you go off on a tangent. If you go off on a tangent, you might find things that contribute to conveying your thesis that you had not thought of yet. This is one of the reasons I love writing so much, is that while you're writing, while you're drafting, you think in a different way and you come up with ideas that you may not have come up with before. So don't be afraid of going off on a tangent, but if your tangent is not supporting the thesis, if you draft it, you find you've gone off on a tangent, if your tangent is not supporting the thesis, then you just either have to cut that material or you have to revise your thesis so that it reflects these new ideas that you've come up with the tangent. This is why we call it a working thesis when you start a draft. It's called a working thesis because you may not, the working thesis you start with may not be exactly the same thesis that you wind up with in revision. It's called a working thesis because you're allowed to change it while you're drafting. If you go off on tangents and you come up with ideas that address the assignment directly, and they're good ideas that you hadn't thought of before, you can alter the thesis. You can change it completely. Okay, so don't be afraid of going off on a tangent in your draft. What you have to do is when you're done with your draft and you're revising it and you read it over and you see, okay, this whole section here, I go off on a tangent and it's not addressing my thesis and it's not addressing the assignment, cut it. Just cut it. Don't worry about going off on a tangent in a draft. Cut it. And then develop the points that address your draft, that address your thesis rather, more directly. We'll talk more about that on Wednesday, but I'm going to wrap it up there. And like I said, if I didn't get you to your question today, I will get to it on Wednesday. For Wednesday, Essay 2 revision is due. Questions or problems, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. We can talk about it. There is homework posted for Wednesday. It's posted. You can see it. It's there. If you have questions or problems about the homework, please email me. And if I can't answer your question in an email, we can set up a time to talk. All right. That's it for today. Once again, stay safe, stay healthy. This is a very weird time. It's likely to get worse before it gets better, but we're going to be okay. All right. Just do what you're supposed to be doing and we'll be okay. All right. Stay safe, stay healthy. I miss being with you guys, and I'll see you Wednesday. All right. Bye-bye.